Today we have Dave Todaro, founder and CEO of Ascendle, and a newcomer to Ascendle Unscripted, Lynzi Cashman, Director of Delivery. Welcome both. So,
Michael.
Yeah, of course. Today, the question, just a few words. Is Agile dead?
That's a big one, right? That's tough because Agile's been around for over 2 decades and has taken various forms. But I think the foundational principles are still the same, right? In terms of putting people first, being responsive to change. Do I think that Agile is slowly becoming a dirty word? Yes. And I think that's for a variety of reasons. I think people are tired of transforming. Agile transformations go on and on and on, right? And so it can take months, years, even decades, God forbid, to properly transform an organization. And that's for a variety of reasons. But I think maybe the word is dead. I think the behind it might be waning a little bit, but I think those principles always are true and are going to hold true in terms of putting people first, being responsive to change, and wanting to do the next right thing. So Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of chatter online these days. You see LinkedIn posts that say, Agile is dead. You don't need this Agile thing anymore. And I think what we see is a little bit of fatigue. People have tried doing Agile things to actually become Agile. And in many cases, they were doing the wrong things or not doing them effectively or not doing them in a disciplined way. And I think what executive leadership sees is, well, these technical guys are doing this Agile thing, and I'm spending a bunch of money on these Agile coaches, but they're not really delivering different outcomes. So I think there's a gap between Agile dogma and actually being Agile. And I think the trick is to figure out what is going wrong.
One of the things that there was a common theme in what you both said, and it was a methodology theme. Lynzi, you mentioned it in one way. Dave, you mentioned it in another way. So it sounds like Agile as a means to an end is starting to shift or has shifted. Is that accurate? Because Lynzi, you were saying that the means to the end or the outcomes are still the principles apply, but maybe there's a shift in methodology. Is that correct?
I think there's becoming more of a shift to what I call fit for purpose. And so it is picking the bits and pieces of an Agile framework that works for a particular organization. Pros and cons to that, for sure, because sometimes you can lose the power of a particular framework by breaking it apart and using it for its pieces. But then there are other times when you do have to really kind of base yourself in reality and say, what are the things that work for my organization with where we are in our evolution? Also, how agile do we really want to be? Can we truly respond to every single change? Do we really want to implement every single piece and part of something? Or are we okay to transform to fix things just enough? And that's really something that only you as a transformation owner and visionary can understand. Any coach who's brought in can't answer that for you, right? Like, your own heart and spirit when it comes to something like that. But Dave and I both mentioned that Agile being dead and seeing a downturn in really how it's, I want to say, valued across the marketplace, but there's been mass layoffs, right? From a number of big name companies where entire Agile organizations, entire coaching organizations have been wiped out, and folks, unfortunately, are left scrambling for their next role. And so that speaks to that underlying kind of fatigue issue that we both spoke about.
Lynzi, I know you might not be able to speak to this, but speaking of layoffs, I believe this happened at Capital One. You mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
You might not know what's behind that, but what do you think, if you could speculate maybe on what was behind that big change? Because from what you mentioned, that basically they're like, we're done with this whole thing here. What do what did they replace? We think you're replacing it with? What was the thinking behind that?
I wasn't there for it, so I don't know what the thinking behind it was, but I would imagine that leadership didn't see a value in this new way of working, or that it was just very scary and daunting for them. Because the best and worst part of any agile framework is it shines a light on your problems so that way you can go fix it. And it's great because then you know your problems and you can prioritize your problems and you can fix them and then you can move forward and be great. And it's scary because it shows you all the problems under the hood, right? And so maybe you're not ready to see them, because Agile can be both procedural and it can also be very emotional, right? Because it forces you to really think about how you want to be as a leader. What is it that you want to model for yourself and then your own organization? And some people just aren't ready for that. And that's okay. That takes a big shift within yourself to be ready for that. And that's a journey, right? We are living human beings who exist within a variety of contexts within ourselves, whether it's personally or professionally. You have to be ready for certain changes to happen. You can't force it, because if you force it, then you're not bought in. And if you're not bought in, the change won't stick, right? Like, I'm very much every New Year's Eve or every New Year's Day, New Year's resolution, I'm like 10 pounds coming off. I'm working out every day. I'm drinking 8 glasses of water a day, all of the things. The only New Year's resolution I have successfully kept were all the years that I said I'm not making a New Year's resolution. Like, literally, I'm really good at keeping that one. But if you're not bought into it, if it's just like, oh, this sounds like a good idea to do it, but you're not truly bought into doing the hard work, to doing the sacrifice, to doing the change, to doing the work, then it's not there. So I almost wonder if that's what happened at Capital One, is that leadership wasn't ready to make those hard changes. And it can be for any reason, and it's certainly not an indictment of Capital One. If your organization isn't ready, your organization isn't ready, and that's okay. So, like I said, I would imagine it's because leadership didn't see the value in it. And so I bet they went back to the tried and true ways of working that they felt comfortable.
Dave, do you agree that it sounds like a little bit of what Lynzi is saying is maybe not all or nothing, but Agile, you can't be half pregnant. It sounds like you kind of are or you're not. You're either applying the methodologies, you're in it and you're fully in it. It's hard to be half in it, kind of thing.
I think Lynzi hit on a couple of things. The big one being, are you ready to become more agile? And I'll paraphrase, do you have the stomach for it? Because I think a lot of leaders make 2 fundamental errors. One is thinking that an agile transformation is about the technical team. And really, it's about the entire organization. It's about the development team plus anybody impacted by the development team, which in most companies is everybody in the company. And I think the other problem is that they think it's going to be easy. So even if they recognize, okay, this isn't just about the development team, it's about the entire company, they don't necessarily have the stomach for it. So when I talk to leaders about this idea of becoming more agile, regardless of the framework methodology, let's just say, and let's just take Agile out of it. Do you want to deliver products faster, more predictably, at a higher level of quality that make your customers happier? If you want to do that, then if you're not doing it today, you need to make some changes. It just happens that after years and years and years of software development, we figured out that there are some lightweight things that we can do to help us, typically undisciplined humans, do the right things at the right time to deliver a consistent outcome. But that is not easy, and it's not clean. It's very messy. So I ask leaders now, do you have the stomach for this? Do you have the stomach to be the unwavering supporter of this? Because as Lynzi pointed out, if there isn't support from the top, there's no way that organizational change can happen. It can't be just at the development team level. It has to start at the top. So the leader needs to have the stomach for it, the stomach for people saying, this isn't working, we should go back to the way that we were doing it. This is dumb, I don't want to do this. And just saying, we are doing this and we will keep doing this. And these are the outcomes that I expect to be generated. And the other thing I tell leaders is some people won't make it. Some people in your organization today will be unable to change and will be unwilling to finally be held accountable to the level that the organization actually needs to reach its true potential.
Yeah, and to add on to what Dave was saying about how it truly is an entire organization that transforms, it's not just IT. Because as we optimize development teams, if you think about the entire, we call it a value stream. So how an idea moves from, hey, that sounds really interesting, to all the way to, hey, customer, it's in your hands. Play with it, give us some feedback. That entire thing is called a value stream. As we look at the value stream, as we optimize delivery, like the software delivery of that, then we're going to naturally look further and further earlier in the chain to optimize more and more problems, to optimize more and more pieces and parts of that process. And so that's when, as one area of the value stream gets optimized, it highlights bottlenecks that are further up the chain. And so how easy is it to see somebody else's faults, right? But then when it's your baby that's getting called ugly, when it's your department that is getting, I don't want to say the heat, but it's next in line to be optimized, then that gets a little harder, right? Because now you're talking about my baby, you're talking about my things. And so folks can really need to dig in and do the work to recognize that a change needs to happen. And so it's not just, to Dave's point, software development. It's everybody, because everybody touches it in one way or another. So being open to that, knowing that folks lead with the best intent, that everybody just wants to be doing the next right thing. That's really not personal.
It sounds like Agile is incredibly revealing for the entire organization.
Mm-hmm.
So my next question would be for either one of you or both of you, what is it about Agile that is so revealing, and to use your term, across the entire value stream, across the entire organization? Because this idea of it being revealing for everything, and then of course having to get buy-in from everybody, especially the leadership. So I guess the first question is, what is it about this methodology that is so revealing so broadly?
Sure. So Agile puts people first, right? And so putting people first to do the next right thing. And so in the context of doing that, we want to create what's called a psychologically safe space. And so to do that, where people feel safe to contribute, where they feel safe to voice their opinion, even if it's a dissenting opinion, where they feel safe and comfortable to raise their hand and say, I actually see this as a problem. Or, hey, Dave, I know you're the CEO and founder. I actually don't agree with your approach. You have to feel safe and secure in your position, right? To be able to do that. Because if you feel that any dissent is going to result in any sort of reprimand, you're never going to do that, right? Because you want, more than anything, we want to feel safe in our position. We want to feel safe in our environments, whatever that may be, physically safe, psychologically safe, emotionally safe. And so it's really up to a lot of the transformation leaders, whether that's a scrum master or an agile coach, to create a culture, an environment where people feel safe. And to do that, you sometimes have to straddle that line of being somebody's sounding board while also being somebody's leader. And so understanding where people come from, unpack the things in them that are professional baggage for them or that are triggers for them. My best friend, if I want to get under her skin, all I have to do is say, sure. And I know that about her, right? That's a trigger for her. That's something that is immediately like, all right, it's go time. And so in a workplace setting, it's important to know that. Because for me, when I say sure, I mean like, yeah, of course, it's totally fine. Happy to do it. She interprets that as passive aggressive because she knows when she says it that she's being passive aggressive. And so it's understanding everybody's own little idiosyncrasies like that. It's understanding how you speak verbally and non-verbally, and then getting other people to realize that about themselves. There's an incredible emphasis on emotional intelligence, on social intelligence, and then on relationship systems intelligence, because it's not just how you interrelate with yourself and then your own coworker, but how are you interrelating with your entire team? How is your team relating with other teams within the same system? And so people make up organizations, right? And there's culture within your organization. And so creating the right type of culture through psychological safety and acceptance and openness and leading with humility that allows for people to bring forth that piece of themselves. And it
Lynn,
really allows them to bring their whole self to work. Sorry.
no, one quick follow-up question. Because we always aim to have actionable items coming out of Ascendle Unscripted.
Mhm.
What questions can a leader ask themselves that are right along the line with everything you've said so far, so that they can position themselves and hold themselves to a standard that's going to be helpful for everything you laid out there? Am
Sure.
I X? Am I, etc.?
Sure. So I would encourage a leader to ask themselves, am I truly listening? Am I truly listening to understand versus listening to respond?
How would they know the difference? Playing devil's advocate.
Sure, they would know the difference on if they take that beat to pause after somebody delivers harsh feedback. Or even just not even necessarily harsh, but says something that you don't like for whatever reason that may be. Maybe somebody said sure to you. And it's something that's so straightforward and can be so easily misinterpreted. So taking a moment as a leader to stop and be like, that person probably doesn't know that that's a trigger for me. I need to look at the entire context within which they are speaking. Not only that, say, is this person's idea or piece of feedback valid? Can I step outside of myself in the situation and truly look at it from their perspective? Can I lead with trust? Maybe trust but verify, but trust first.
I would love to bounce something off the both of you. There are organizations that I know that let the most junior people in the room speak first in every meeting. There's two main reasons for that. One, they don't have any limits yet. So they haven't been there 10, 15 years and they haven't, built any box. And so they're just, sometimes just pure curiosity. It's just one reason. The second reason is that so they don't risk. So if they say something, they're not going to undermine the leader. So they don't risk contradicting a leader. Do you feel like that could be a tactic to make sure that, because going back to what you were saying earlier, Lynzi, everybody's got to feel secure. And sometimes those younger voices don't want to speak up. It's their first job. They might feel insecure. Do you feel like letting the juniors maybe go first as a leader could be something that could be helpful in creating a culture of curiosity, of compassion?
I definitely think so. And I think also having the leader invite that criticism, invite that contradiction, whether that is through an open-ended question or just by asking somebody directly, reading the room, reading somebody's face and saying, hey, Michael, it looks like that you may have a question or that you didn't agree with what I'm saying. What's on your mind right now? There are no wrong answers. And then even if that person says something off the wall that is truly wrong, reacting, and it happens, right? Reacting in a supportive way.
Dave, are there questions or guidelines or things? Because I know you've had conversations with your own clients about this, probably very often. Are there some top of mind questions that come to mind for you that you have advice that you have given or guidance that you may have given that would be pertinent?
Yeah, I think there's three things that are really hard about becoming more agile. Again, accelerating delivery of high quality software. And it has to do with the changes that companies have to go through. And I think there's three big ones that are different. The first thing, and they're all really challenging. The first thing is there's this really hard engineering thing that you need to start doing, which is producing usable software every so often. I like every 2 weeks. And that's extraordinarily difficult to do. In traditional development, we may go months and the software isn't totally usable because there's a bunch of things that aren't quite done yet. There's still some bugs, there's some performance issues. So that's the first challenge, is an engineering challenge, which is we need to drive this to done every 2 weeks. The second one is the amount of attention that's paid to that process. All of a sudden, the bigwigs are starting to show up. If they're doing the process right, in my opinion, they're starting to show up to take a look at what the teams are working on so they can be in tune with what's happening, but also so they can provide their support. And I think the other one has to do with power. And I like to talk about inverting power. When organizations are truly working in the most effective way, those who are doing the work are the ones with the most power. You've probably heard the term servant leadership. I take servant leadership very literally. And I like to say you need to invert the power of the organization such that those doing the daily work have the most power. So if someone, to your point, Michael, the most junior member of the most junior team raises their hand and says, I'm having a problem, that the entire balance of the organization asks the question, what can we do about that? This is especially tricky for managers who are used to managing, who are used to telling everybody what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And when organizations work most effectively, that's thrown out. And instead you say, well, maybe those who are doing the work all day, every day, are the ones who should figure out how to do it the best, and then have them tell us, what can we do to support them? So instead of telling people what to do, managers need to shift into a more supporting sort of role. I like to say that they need to become a coach, mentor, trainer, and sometimes therapist to just help out their team and figure out what can we do today. Now, that doesn't negate all of the experience that managers have. Usually they have quite a bit of tenure, either in business, technology, at that company. They can still leverage their expertise, but it can be really challenging to stop and here's how you're going to do it.
Harvard Business Review came out or did a study on trip.com on, they did an A/B test. I don't know if you saw it, but they did a test on if we have folks in the office 5 days a week versus if we have a hybrid model where they're in 3 days a week with a certain schedule where everybody comes in. Two big things were revealed in that study. One, productivity was identical between the groups. Neither group was more productive than the other. The big difference was that the attrition went down something like 34% in the remote group. So the idea that being less productive in a remote setting is, they found through this test, I think over the course of 6 months in all their surveys, that it's actually better for an organization to be remote. So the question I want to bring up is, managing a remote workforce, as you all do so well, and then learning this from, trip.com, this experiment, going, okay, well, actually hybrid's just as good for this and way better for retention. So why wouldn't we do that? What tips do you have around what you were just talking about there, Dave, those three items, and then communication across the board you were both talking about in the remote environment? Because we've talked a lot on Ascendle Unscripted about communication, and it seems to be a common, a red thread, if you will. Speaking to a remote workforce, this accountability is, every 2 weeks we've got something. The stakeholders are a lot more in contact. What advice do you both have for those leaders that are working with a hybrid or maybe even a fully remote workforce?
Yeah, I think there's worry in some executive suites that, well, if I can't see my team members, then they're obviously not going to be doing great work. And I think as that study found, and what we found now by being virtual from the start, now going on 12 years, is that most people want to do good work. And the other thing about transparency, as Lynzi pointed out, pretty quickly you can tell if you have anybody that really doesn't want to do good work, because there's nowhere to hide. That total transparency that comes into play and driving something to done and there being a positive amount of stress, like a good type of stress as opposed to a bad type of stress based on that imminent deadline of every 2 weeks, pretty quickly, you'll hear from the team members, hey, this person is just not cutting it. We've tried everything that we can think of. We've worked with, their manager and ours, and we just can't figure out how to get them producing. Pretty quickly, you'll start to hear those things. In the old way, where you weren't forced, you didn't have that positive pressure to actually produce working software every 2 weeks, those folks can kind of slide along, and we're never really getting to done in that old model. Today, everyone's under the gun to produce, and those who can't or won't pretty quickly will be voted off the island.
What's your view, Lynzi, on a hybrid approach? And what are some things to think about if someone's working remotely, hybrid, leading from the screen, if you will?
Sure. I think one of the hallmarks of leadership is meeting people where they are. And so one of the things that I do is I flex to somebody else's work style. And so if they prefer to read communication, then I'm going to type them communication. If they prefer to have a conversation about it, then we're going to have a conversation about it. If they prefer to read and talk about it, then let's do both. Let's figure out a way that is sustainable. Now, can you individually communicate with 600 people? I mean, if you can, good for you. I'm not that great. So I cannot. But you do have to find a way that is sustainable for you. And so understanding that everybody has their own communication and learning style, and that you generally have to tell somebody something, I believe, 7 times before they actually retain it. And I also always fall back on the quote, Dave, I'm sure you know what I'm thinking about, I don't know what I've said until you tell me what you heard. Because I can say green, 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 but maybe you hear blue. For whatever reason, you hear blue. And so then getting to the root of that before it becomes an issue can really be helpful. So I just straight up ask people, repeat back to me what you heard.
So is Agile dead?
I don't think the principles of Agile can ever be dead. I don't think the mindset of it, the embodiment of it can ever be dead. I think it will take on different titles. I think it will take on different language, maybe product-led, people first. But I don't think it's dead. I think it will, just like anything, it will transform, it'll inspect and adapt itself. But I don't think it's dead.
Dave?
I think as long as we have humans who need to communicate and work with technology, especially challenging technology projects, which every software project is very challenging, I think we will need tools to help us humans make sure that we're communicating in the right ways to deliver those outcomes. And so whether you call it Agile or Volkswagens, I think we just need some help and some framework to ensure that we can deliver the outcomes that successful organizations need.
That sounds like a little bit of the next question I wanted to ask, and maybe we can wrap up here. I'll let Lynzi go, and we'll come back to you, Dave. One of the other things I love about Ascendle Unscripted is that here's how you could be thinking about the future. Mm-hmm. We always want some actionable stuff, but we always want that glimpse into the future, that forward-thinking element. So given everything we've talked about so far, Lynzi, if I were to ask you the question, or fill in the blank, here's how you could be thinking about the future, what would you say?
I think that you can be thinking about the future in terms of product and being product-led and leading with that customer-first mindset.
And that sounds like it's been a shift, you're suggesting.
I think it's in the flavor of Agile in terms of being responsive to customer feedback and listening to what they say, but I think that it is new enough that it hasn't exhausted people yet.
Dave, how do you advise clients? What's the forward thinking thing? And just kind of maybe planting the seed for them. Here's how you could be thinking about things.
I think as far as looking ahead, you need to remember that most technology projects don't fail because of technology. There's a great book called Peopleware from back in the day. Highly recommend everyone read Peopleware, by the way. And as its name implies, the challenge with technology projects is people and communication. And usually the technical folks putting the hands on the keyboard aren't your biggest challenge. Now, you may have some engineering challenges that need to be spruced up, but the bigger challenge is ensuring that you are building the right things. The majority of products have a lot of features that never get used. So understanding your market, understanding your users, putting software into your customers' hands faster, and then asking them, what do they want next, versus you dreaming up a bunch of features for 2 years and then handing it to them is super important. And making sure that that communication between the customers, your product team, and the rest of the folks that are talking to customers, including sales, marketing, implementation, training, customer support, etc., making sure that their voices are all heard, and then that information is communicated into the development teams. Like most things, it comes back to basics. Listen to your customers, make sure that your development team is doing the work that's going to drive the highest value for those customers, and make sure that you're doing that at a high level of quality on a predictable basis. That's it. Like many things, simple, but not easy.
Mm-hmm.
Can I ask one bonus question?
Of course.
To that point, Dave, one of my favorite quotes is the Henry Ford quote. If I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So how does an organization balance exactly what you're talking about, making sure that it is customer-led, but at the same time realizing the customer doesn't always know what's best for them? How do you make that balance? Or is it even possible?
There's always a balance. I think that one thing that's important to remember is that you don't truly know what your customer wants, and neither do they, to that point that you just talked about. And the most important thing is to put something into their hands and see how they use it. Watch them use it, either literally watching them use it through user studies or instrumenting your software to see what features are getting used. Get something into their hands fast. Eric Ries, the author of The Lean Startup, talks about this. He says, take what you think is the minimum set of functionality you can give your customer, cut it in half, then cut it in half again, and then cut it in half again, and that's what you should actually give them first. And most folks would look around horrified at that. Are you saying that 1/8 of what I think is the minimum possible that I can deliver is what I should deliver? And the answer is yes, because you have no idea what customers want. Now, apologies to all the user study experts, and trust me, I've run many focus groups over time. I would not do that again. I would talk to some customers, get a general idea of what they want, build something and give it to them within weeks, if possible, not months, and certainly not years. I've built software for years. 80% of those features that I built were probably not used by most clients.
Lynzi, thoughts on faster horses?
There has to be, like to Dave's point, there has to be that balance between innovation and listening to your customers. I always think back to Target specifically and how they do the pickup order. It has personally wrecked me and my finances, because not only is it available within 2 hours, but when you click on, hey, I'm on my way, they say, do you want anything from Starbucks? And I had no idea that I wanted something from Starbucks as often as I did. So it was new information for all of us. But I think it's important to put yourself in the shoes of the customer And as you are, because we all get so engrossed in our day to day, right? And take that step outside of it and say, how are people who are not in it in the day to day and worrying about things like the cycle time of pickup truly experiencing this product or this service or this experience, whatever it is? And then just as a regular person, what would I want to make that better? So being customer centric, truly looking through the eyes of the user, and then experimenting. So not being afraid to build on an existing product, to innovate. We're not always going to come out with a new car, right? Like going from the horse to the car was a big deal. Going from picking up my order to picking up my order with coffee, less of a societal and industrial impact, right? Huge impact to my caffeination and to my overall joy as a person, but it's not going to have like that big overarching, and like it's not going to like usher in the next industrial revolution, right? But so not being afraid to riff on something that is already existing.
Got it.
Mhm.
You got me asking the question here, does it spark joy? If it's yes, I should just get it. And
Mhm.
I think, whether it's a grande latte or whatever,
Yeah.
we covered a lot. This has been fantastic. I always like to give the opportunity. Do either of you have any parting thoughts before we sign off?
I think don't set your bar too low
Mhm.
in terms of what your organization can achieve.
Mhm.
Just because you've been able to be at this level and maybe a little bit better over time, and that there's been some pain trying to get to the next level, don't give up, while simultaneously realizing that, again, that question, do you have the stomach for real change, the real change that's going to be required, including some of the folks in your company not being here any longer, to reach your true potential?
I would also add, don't be afraid of the ugly middle, because when you first start out on a journey, on a transformation, whatever that looks like, it's all rosy, right? Everybody's super excited. We're learning new skills. We're interacting with each other in a new way. And then you start hitting some bumps in the road, right? It's the ugly middle. As you are navigating what this really looks like to get to that wonderful outcome of being a truly responsive organization that can deliver the exact right thing that the customer wants. And so don't be afraid of the ugly middle.
Thank you both. And thank you,
Thank you,
viewers.
Michael.
My
Thank you.
pleasure, as always. This is episode 4 of Ascendle Unscripted. Stay tuned for lots more. And Dave, Lynzi, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.